Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
Has Jordan, Allen shakes free, gets two! Gilmore on Steph! Brother! Lead Toledo artists, you get 21!
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead!
Hello and welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast at HarvardParoxysm.com. I am Jason Mann, and with me as usual, Rich Craich. Rich, great to be back with you.
Absolutely. Excited.
I'm glad you're excited, Rich.
Yeah,
I'm always happy when you're excited.
This is a good one. This is going to be a fun little episode.
I think it will be a good episode. I'm waiting for the time in which you begin the show by saying you don't think it's going to be a good episode because
that's true. There might be some.
All right. Well,
maybe that's my stock answer, so that when people hear me not say that, they're like, "Uh-oh."
They know. If you don't say anything,
if I'm just silent, they're like, "Oh no,
all right.
This one's going to be terrible." So
all right. Well, fair enough. So
we'll see.
So we are going to talk about the wonderful ESPN NBA rank top 100 players of all time that was done over recent weeks. We meant to get this last week and things delayed it. Unfortunately, our timing is not the best given that it is about 8 hours until the trade deadline or so, give or take a few. I guess more than that. But regardless, by the time people hear this, it's going to be trade deadline
nothing will
day.
happen. Overrated.
We'll get this one in early so you can listen.
It'll be early in the morning. Yeah, it'll let you cool off a little bit before the hot trade deadline action starts.
Exactly. So. Or save it till later. It's going to be pretty much as relevant in a year from now as it is.
The benefit of our show.
Yeah, that is the nice thing. We're very evergreen. So.
Yeah, we just linked because last year we did a trade deadline, a really good podcast with the guy who runs the NBA trades Tumblr, and it was awesome.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, I was blanking on his name, but that's an episode that I went back and listened to about half of it today, and I was like, you know what? We don't really ever say anything that like you wouldn't know if we just said, hey, here's a brand new episode on like NBA trade deadline thing. So I think we should from now on just never ever reference anything that's currently going on.
Okay.
And then we really only have to record like 10 shows a year and just like keep putting them out. And
all right, well,
people, they might not even notice. I'll be like, oh, sweet, like.
Well, we'll keep that
Scottie Pippen retrospective. I can't wait.
Yeah. Like, we'll keep that in mind for for business philosophy. So.
Exactly. Right.
All right. So we're gonna go through the first few slots. Obviously, we're not gonna go through all 100 because that would be very boring. So we don't want to do that. But
we're gonna do mini retrospectives of every single man in this list.
So I mean, we're gonna go through
Sean Kemp. Oh, sorry.
we obviously did our top 50 project over the off season. That was our looking back at our choices for the top 50 players of all time, compared it to the NBA 50 greatest players of all time that was done about 20 years ago. So we're obviously going to kind of talk about their findings versus our findings, talk about so kind of the biggest ranking issues we had, and then we'll talk about some of the new players that they considered more recent players than we considered, whether they really merit such consideration, sort of some ideas about that. I don't know, anything else, Rich, we're going to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, I think a lot of it is going to be us sort of breaking down the list a little bit, and like you said, sort of comparing and contrasting it to our top 50 list is going to be the biggest thing, versus us going on here and being like, oh my God, like Moses Malone at 15, that sucks. Like, that you don't need that. And I'm sure there's been like 7,000 podcasts that have already done that. And because people do not react at all to NBA rank. They didn't care one bit. It elicited no social media reaction. I didn't even know what was going on, to be honest. No, but like obviously people are very passionate about like where people ranked or whatever. Sure. And I don't know if we're going to worry about that as much as we're going to worry about a few guys that like we had on our list that they didn't, or a few guys that we had very high on our list that they either had like well out of the top 50 or well. And then I think the biggest thing that at least I know I wanted to talk about is a lot of the current players, because they were very aggressive about some guys. Whereas, we still had some current guys, but a lot of the guys we had sort of come to the conclusion that, hey, if they retired tomorrow, they would definitely be on this list. Whereas the ESPN one, you can make some arguments that maybe they're projecting some stuff onto guys. Maybe they're thinking, hey, with this guy's trajectory, he will be there or whatever. So it'll be interesting to talk about sort of the philosophies of how they got to this list and stuff like that as well. So not necessarily like us just breaking down their list and telling them how terrible they are for ranking, this guy in 75th as opposed to 80th, because nobody wants to listen to that, but more kind of a compare and contrast, because we did this project essentially over the summer, so it's still fresh in our mind, of doing it and knowing how difficult it is as well for a lot of people that are like, oh, this is terrible, like, and I think most people took it pretty okay, other than just having a little bit of gripes with where certain guys ranked. But it is not easy. Like we spent so long on that top 50 list to try to get what we thought was a representative top 50, and they won 100. So I can't even imagine the work that goes into that.
And we didn't rank them, and they ranked them. So
exactly. I could never rank them. And I mentioned that today too. Like, I have such phobia about like for me, the top 10 would probably change on like a daily basis for me. You know what I mean? Like it's just, me ranking is so hard, whereas it's much easier to say, hey, here's 100 guys that are really good versus like, here are the top 100 in this order. I mean, that's where I just can't do that. So I envy them in a way, but.
Indeed. Well, we'll go through the first few, because I think there are some interesting things to kind of call from the from the first few. Number 1, Michael Jordan, no big surprise. Number 2, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Number 3, LeBron James, maybe higher than some people might have expected. Number 4, Magic Johnson. Number 5, Wilt Chamberlain. Number 6, Larry Bird. Number 7, Bill Russell. Number 8, Tim Duncan. Number 9, Shaquille O'Neal. Number 10, Hakeem Olajuwon. I don't have any significant issue with anybody there. I would probably put Oscar Robertson in the top 10 instead of Hakeem. He's ranked 11, so it's hardly a major qualm, but that would probably be the only thing that I would throw out there and consider, a major difference that I would have. It's not even that major.
I'm with you there. I think Hakeem is the one guy that sort of stands out to me. And that was actually surprising when we were doing our top 50 list of looking at Hakeem and sort of stripping out a lot of what we perceive about Hakeem and just kind of looking at the raw numbers, looking at some sort of stuff. And he was a guy who, while, I mean, obviously a fantastic all-time legendary great player, didn't seem like he was on equal level with maybe like, the top 10, the elite of the elite, like we're talking about here with this top 10. Again, not taking anything away from Hakeem, but like you said, Oscar Robertson's a very good choice to go into that 10 slot. You could even make a case for, they have Kobe Bryant 12th. You could even maybe make a case for that. I like Jerry West or Julius Erving in there as well, but that's a minor qualm. I mean, all those guys that I'm listing, like Oscar, like you said, was 11th. Kobe was 12th. Jerry West was 13th. Julius Erving was 14th. Even a Moses Malone and Karl Malone, those are the next two guys at 15, 16. Those are guys that I could maybe, you can maybe make a case to get into that top 10. But like you're saying, when you're doing that, you're sort of splitting hairs. I mean, that whole, I really, for the most part, they're top 20, which I'm sure we're going to go over here in a little bit. I really have no qualms about most of the guys in that top 20. So
yeah. And I mean, you went through 16. 17 is Dirk Nowitzki, 18 Charles Barkley, 19 John Stockton, 20 David Robinson. I would probably put Robinson a little bit higher because just the advanced stats were so blow away from him, but his reputation isn't quite that high, and you can always kind of parse those a little bit. So 20's fine. I get that. The thing that did surprise me was Dirk being at 17. That seemed higher than I would have expected, and kind of higher than we saw him on our project. He was one of the kind of one of the 6 automatic players that we decided, okay, they definitely belong in, along with LeBron, along with Duncan, along with Kobe. Guys, this is post 1997 guys. But yeah. I would have put him 6 on that list. I would have put him behind Garnett, who's 21. I probably would have put him behind Dwayne Wade, who's 27. Nothing wrong with him. He's obviously fantastic, but I would have thought him a little bit lower, and he does seem
a little high, and obviously I'm a huge Dirk fan,
sure.
and of course, sure. But putting him, I mean, there's even guys you go through the rest of the top, the top 25 or whatever, or the top 30, you see guys even like a Scottie Pippen who's 25 and very far behind Dirk, which is pretty like staggering. Like even like an Elgin Baylor is another one there as well. So there's just a few interesting. Yeah, he's kind of maybe a little too high for me, but. One thing I did kind of notice, and I'm curious on your thoughts too, if you noticed that top 20, I mean, for better or for worse, a lot of guys from like 1985 to the present. You know what I mean? Like you look at the list, you got Jordan, obviously not Kareem, but you have Jordan, LeBron, Magic, Bird, Duncan, Shaquille, to a point, you could say Hakeem in there, a Kobe Bryant, Julius Erving, a Karl Malone, Dirk Nowitzki, Charles Barkley, John Stockton, David Wright. It just seemed very loaded. And I'm not saying that's a criticism. I mean, obviously those are all, we talked about a legendary era of NBA history, but you look at that and it's very, it's centered around like about 20, 25 years of NBA history versus, so that was something I sort of noticed with that top 20. It was like, oh my God, there's a lot of like current or semi-current players in that top 20.
It really only Russell, Wilt, West, and Oscar in the top 20 play, didn't play at all before 1980. And then everyone else played either their entire or a significant portion of their career, post 1980. I mean, Kareem, he played for so long, so half his career was after 1980. And
he's not fair.
And then Dr. J, he'd be the other one. And but other than that, I mean, Moses a little bit, but pretty much everyone else is post 80 or post 84.
And not necessarily criticism, just kind of.
I'm sure that's some bias. Yeah, it's not a surprising bias. I mean,
no.
Recency bias is, it's not shocking. Obviously, there's more fame in that era. It's more recent. There's more video of it. The game is more similar to what it is today, so it's easier to kind of put some things into context. All those reasons. So, this isn't. I'm not really ripping it. It is interesting. So, so if you consider the top 39, everyone on this list was in our top 50 except for Steph Curry, who was 23. I think we can get more into Steph in a little bit, but
let's do that. Yeah,
but that's but that's I think that's a fairly good ratio. And then if you look at the top 50, 42 of their top 50 was in our top 50. So the guys who were not in there: Elvin Hayes, Bill Walton, James Worthy, Dominique Wilkins, Willis Reed, Russell Westbrook, Ray Allen. All those guys, except for Westbrook, because he was just more recent, were guys we definitely, considered. Some of them we strongly considered, were kind of our Willis Reed and Ray Allen were kind of our last cuts. Elvin Hayes was probably my last cut. So, certainly guys who I think are absolutely, worthy of being there. And if you look at the guys who, were in this list but not in the top 50, Wes Unseld 53, Pau Gasol 56. Those are obviously very close to 50. So I think those are similar decisions being made. It's not far off from what we believed. And Dennis Rodman at 64, Artis Gilmore at 70. I think we kind of took a little bit of a leap in putting those guys in the 50. I don't think those guys are necessarily consensus 50. Maybe Gilmore at this point. But he was not in the original top 50. He's kind of historically always been underrated. So, that one I don't mind. The ones that do kind of throw me: Dolph Schayes at 74, Sam Jones at 78, Billy Cunningham at 88, and Paul Arizin at 90. Like, those seem way too low to me.
Yeah, Arizin at 90 especially.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, boy.
Schayes at 74.
I mean, that's a good player.
Schayes feels like a top 30 player to me.
Yeah, that's it.
Again, considering what he did during his era, his longevity, he's one of probably the three best players of, playing over his career, 3 or 4 best players playing over his career. So, I think he definitely belongs there. Sam Jones, it's close. It's not quite as far for him. But yeah, I mean, those guys I think would bounce off. Those guys definitely are detracted because they played so long ago and they're not like the absolute top-notch guys that, the Oscar, Wilt, the guys who are really, you still remember very well. Those guys either, weren't as that high profile or just played too long ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they don't come top to mind. I mean, if you're sort of asking somebody, and again, it's somebody who's not maybe doing a ton of look at NBA history or whatever. Maybe they're a current fan and they know a little bit about the history, but those are guys that are just not going to come up or come up top of mind to someone who's casually in the NBA history or just sort of even if they're a really passionate fan, they're not ones that really before doing this podcast a little bit, you know what I mean? Like before, a few years before we really started getting into this and I started getting into NBA history, if you told me top 100 players, Paul Ayers and probably might not have been, what I mean? Like, I don't know if he would have been there, but now doing the research, going back, us doing what we did in the summer, then you sort of shine a light on guys like a Dolph Schayes or Paul Ayers. And so I get, and again, not a criticism, but yeah, just something that was a little interesting of how low they were. And I'm right with you on the Gilmore and Rodman. Those are guys that I think we sort of I don't want to say sort of cheerleaded for a little bit. I mean, I'm happy they're on our list, but there are guys that, yeah, absolutely. If you told me there's no way Dennis Rodman's a top 50 player, I wouldn't argue with you. I'd go, okay, that's fine. I mean, I think he is. You don't. That's fine.
Yeah,
They're not guys that I'm like, no, you're absolutely wrong if you don't put them in your top 50. I get it where they wouldn't be.
That's
there.
absolutely
so, Dolph, not Dolph. I don't know. Dolph's kind of has to be in.
Yeah, Dolph. I think he has to be in the top 50. There's no question about that. Yeah, I mean, Sam Jones, Billy Cunningham, I think are borderline top 50. I put them in, but we didn't put Cunningham in, but he's close. Sam Jones, I think, should be in. Arizona definitely think should be in. Yeah, so those are the two. The other ones, the three players who were on the top 50 greatest of all time list that weren't ranked in the NBA rank. Bill Sharman, Dave Bing, Hal Greer. I think Sharman's the biggest oversight on that. I mean, he really did a lot to sort of create the modern shooting guard position. He was really, really effective during his time. Important part of those early Celtics championship teams. He's kind of a surprise that he wasn't in there at all. Greer's a perpetually underrated guy, but to not make the list was surprising. Bing's a little bit more famous, I think, but not quite as good. I think he definitely should be on the list, but I would put him sort of, like in the 80s or 90s. So it's not like it's. I think Sharman's definitely the biggest oversight. The other ones are. I get why. Again, I sort of get why they weren't included, but they were a little bit head scratching for me.
Absolutely.
Especially since you can look at the top 50 list, and if you're doing your research on top 100, I would think you would consult the top 50 list and look into the guys. I'm sure
right.
There are guys who weren't not everyone had heard of. So that seems sort of like an easy one, but
I'm with you on Sharman as well.
Yeah, definitely.
He's no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I would think for my biggest issue sort of with this list is it's pretty unfair to the 50s players. We already talked about Shays and Arizon and a Sharman. Bob Pettit was 34 and George Mikan was 33. I think those guys definitely. I mean,
Bob Pettit's. I mean, that's a guy who I think I'm not even sure I appreciate him quite enough. But when I think you were tweeting out about this while it was going on, and I think it was you and Curtis Harris were going on there and going, "Oh my God, Pettit at 34, that's ridiculous." Or I forgot the exact wording, maybe not that aggressive about it. And I remember, even though I did this research, not that long ago, I said, let me go look at Bob Pettit's career numbers or whatever. And when you look, it's astounding what that guy did. I mean, of course, the longevity might not be there for some people, but man, what he did when he was playing. And even though the longevity for that era wasn't awful, but man, that guy was just a killer. I mean, it's just his page, his basketball reference page is almost all bold. I mean, that guy just dominated statistically like nobody I've seen of that era.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane what he did.
And into the 60s, into the more competitive, more integrated era too. It wasn't just the early 50s. I mean, he started his career, I think 52, 53. So he kind of played into. I mean, he had a 12, 13-year career, a strong one. He was very high in the leaderboards when he retired. He was all-time leading scorer. I did a lot to really. To set the template for the power forward position.
I mean, he averaged 26 and 16.
And
you know what I mean? There we go. Yeah. That's it.
Efficient first time, led his team to a championship and I think 4 finals appearances. And Mikan, I mean, he won 7 championships in 8 years, was the dominant player of his decade. It's fine. I know in a few years later, he was not going to be, the league changed and, he wouldn't make it, probably in the 60s game, definitely not in the modern game, but that's not what we're arguing. We're arguing, as we've talked about in our criteria before, you have to consider them within the context of your era. And, I can see the argument certainly that, well, the 50s era wasn't as strong as later eras. And you have to kind of consider, the strength of an era when you consider, how good the players were. I mean, if it's a lesser era, then you have to kind of count that a little bit less. If it's a stronger era, you have to count that a little more. But then again, it's also hard to judge. I think what eras are best and what eras aren't best because there's so many factors that you kind of have to consider. And obviously problems with evaluating 50s and 60s players, a lack of video footage, lack of info beyond the basic stats, different style of play, obviously racism's effect on the game. In the early 50s, the black players are barred from the game, and then basically a quota system up until the mid to late 60s. So, so obviously, those are important factors, and we've that's certainly been brought to my attention as sort of like some people who don't, just kind of can't take that era serious, or just can't value that era in the same way because of that issue. And I get that, but I don't, I do think the dominant players of that era still, made their market more important. And, you have to also factor that it was, a league with only 8 teams and only 80 players in the league. And, that's a pretty competitive, league right there. So, it's we have 450 players now. I mean, so
yeah, right.
I mean, obviously,
well, and like we
have a lot more people who are strong at basketball, but still, I mean, there's so many things to kind of consider in there.
No, and like I said, and we talked about it during our top 50. I mean, these guys can't control what era they play. I mean, Bob Pettit could only be good in the era he was in. You know what I mean? Like, he couldn't. It's not his fault that these sort of factors came into it. He could only live in the era he lived in and play in the era he played in. So I always judge it by, okay, look at what they did in the time when they played, and not really worry of what kind of basketball it was and what sort. I mean, yeah, there's of course some weird oddities here and there and stuff like that, but to sort of undermine these guys because of those sort of things and because of racism and because of the lowest teams and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, those are all factors. And if I was having a discussion with you and saying, hey, what's the best era of basketball ever? Who's the, yeah, but when you're ranking these sort of guys and talking about this sort of stuff, yeah, you kind of have to, I think you have to think of guys in their era. And Bob Pettit's a guy who just completely dominated his era. And it's not his fault that there were X amount of teams, that there were a ratio or a quota of African-American player. I mean, that's not his fault necessarily. So I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to say, well, Bob Pettit is not, a top 15 player of all time because he only had 8 teams when he played. It's like, that's just silly. Yeah. Like, why?
I mean, you can think about all these things. I think weighing these factors are fine, but I think just, I think these guys are more penalized because it was so long ago, as opposed to really taking a deep look into some of those things. I obviously could be wrong. I don't know. There was some writing about, where guys stood, but it's not, obviously it's just a collection of voters, and not everyone revealed their reasons and how good a job they did researching and so forth. But, yeah, I mean, I would say Rick Barry, Walt Frazier were 37 and 38. Some of the 60s and 70s players, I think, got a little bit undervalued, but I don't think that was quite as dramatic of an effect. I mean, I think of Barry and Frazier maybe in the top 25, but, so they're not necessarily that far off. Not as far off as Pettit and especially Mike in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So talking about the rankings of the current players who are not in our top 50, and initially, because initially this came out as like positional ranks, and the big thing that got everyone's attention at first is that Steph Curry was rated the 4th best point guard of all time, which obviously seems very premature. I mean, he is having an incredible
warning. We like Steph Curry.
He's having an incredible, great, tremendous, historic season right now. He's 50 games into that season, and will likely finish it at one of the great, if not the greatest, at least offensive production season of all time. So that certainly matters. He's also on one of the greatest teams of all time. That certainly matters, and is the most important reason, I think, for them being that. So, all those things matter. I certainly think, we kind of made our cutoff. I think Durant was the most recent player that we kind of made for our cutoff on how, what's the latest a player can start their career to kind of achieve our list.
Sure.
But looking at Curry's resume, I don't think that, I think I now think top 50 he has a reasonable case for top 50. Top 25, it's still a little bit.
That's high. I mean, that's and I love Steph Curry. I think, but you have to sort of, and this is the factor we brought up with our top 50, is if tomorrow Steph Curry just says, you know what, I retire, I'm done. This is stupid, I don't care, I'm done. If you look at that rating, then take, wait another 10 years. So he retires tomorrow, then you wait 10 years and you go back and look and you go, Steph Curry, 23 all time. I don't know about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we're sort of assuming, and rightfully so. I mean, yeah, the guy is probably, barring a horrible, horrific injury or something awful, is going to get to that point most likely. He's going to be a top 50 player. Like you said, he's probably already at that point now. And for all intents and purposes, we'll probably make it to the top 25. But it's just right now, this year, it just seems a little too early for that. Especially when, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, he's got peers that are, comparable if you really strip away some of the number, or strip away some of the sort of biases you might have about that player in particular, or what the success of that guy. If you just look at pure numbers and statistics wise, there are some guys like a Russell Westbrook, we'll talk about here in a little bit, and even a James Harden, who have a case, just as good as Steph Curry. And that's not to say that Steph Curry is not going to be better than them all time, but right now at this moment, as we're ranking this, those guys are, almost, like Russell Westbrook is 49th and Steph Curry's 23rd. It's just, it seems like a very odd sort of gap between those two. Whereas I'd be fine if Steph Curry was 45th or whatever. I'd say, okay, that's fine. That's good with me. The 23rd just seems a little high. Yeah. I mean, that just, I don't know. It's a little bit much, especially when you got, there's some pretty good guys that are sort of behind him. Like I feel like Scottie Pippen should probably be, a little higher than Steph Curry at this point.
Right.
But,
right.
Or George Mikan or Bob Bennett, but
Sure. Yeah, and I think that you can argue, okay, well, Scottie Pippen never had a peak season that Steph Curry has, and I guess it depends on what you're weighing too. I mean, if you weigh peak higher than I think that we did, if that's really like your biggest factor and longevity isn't quite as important, then okay,
sure.
Then I guess I'll throw that at you. But I do think it's got to be a blend of peak and longevity. But yeah, looking at Curry's case, won a 2015 MVP, one of only a handful of players to win an MVP and title in the same season. One All NBA first team, one second team. He'll get another first team, of course, this year for certain. 3 seasons top 10 in win shares for 48, 4 seasons box score plus minus. That includes this season, by the way, which is not finished, but presumably he will remain in those.
I think he's going to get there, yeah.
He is 33rd all time in MVP award shares. Obviously he has, is going to probably win another MVP this year, so that will certainly raise up. I mean, 2 MVPs in a row, then that you're starting to get into territory where I'm feeling comfortable, putting you in your, in the top 30, top 40. I mean, you achieving 2 titles in a row. Once he does that, then I think we start to have another case of bumping.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. 2 MVPs and 2 titles in back-to-back. Yeah. I mean, he's
obviously on track for that. It's a strong possibility that could happen. And if they continue, having their great success, if he has another 2 or 3 just awesome years and so forth, then then we're starting to feel like, okay, top 25, top 20, maybe even higher, depending on how great those achievements are. But obviously still a ways to go as far as that goes. So all-time ranks are 25th in win shares for 48, 11th in box score plus minus, which again only goes back to 74. He's third in third in free throw percentage, second in 3-point percentage, 26th all time in 3-pointers, and that's going to be getting higher pretty soon, and 9th in true shooting percentage. So obviously those accomplishments in 3-pointers are quite impressive. He will rise up the leaderboard, will be first in 3-pointers probably in really just a handful of seasons. I think think he's that far.
Yeah, it won't take him long. Yeah, it really will not take him that long. Shockingly, I mean, it seems surprising, but yeah, I mean, if you look at the leaderboards and just how he's just decimating those leaderboards. I mean, the yearly output that he's doing is just ungodly by previous
I think
standards.
Ray Allen is just a couple short of 2,000, and Steph is at 1,436. So
yeah, it's it's pretty obnoxious how quickly he's probably going to be there.
And Steph's had 2 historic seasons and then 2 very good seasons, I would say, or maybe excellent seasons. So if you kind of compare that to somebody like, I don't know, like Earl Monroe, that's kind of like at the level that he would have. And then he had the rest of his career where he was, pretty good or okay, depending on, he kind of was up and down. But I think you're if he retired right now, you're kind of at that point without obviously not as great of a peak, but That's sort of where you would kind of think of him if he had played 30 years ago. So also one thing we didn't we should have talked about is that there were only 3 players on the top 50 that were that we didn't actually or that we did talk about that were not on the top 50 list, which was Kevin Johnson, Dan Issel, and Sean Marion. I do think they would have been top 100, especially Issel and Johnson. But yeah, I guess a little surprised that Johnson isn't on there. I wonder if his recent scandal revelations had.
I'd imagine that plays a small part in it. It's very hard not to sort of, and I think we even wrestled with that a little bit too. It's like, if we leave him out, I won't be too upset.
Right? Yeah, I think when we recorded the show, like the latest in that had not dropped yet. So and then the show came out after it did, and we didn't mention it. I was like, well, probably for the best. So, yeah, and he played more career minutes than Bill Walton, who we didn't have on our top 50, but made this ESPN rank. So, and I think there's some interesting kind of parallels there as far as early career, a little bit beset with injuries, although Curry, for the most part, has been healthy, more healthy.
Yeah, that's it's so far gone now, it seems, at this point.
Yeah.
It's crazy because if you remember the narrative, I mean, it was just this guy. I mean, this guy's ankles, it's going to rob us of like a very good shooter of all time. There was like legit claims or legit thoughts that, man, this guy is just never going to be right. And that sucks because he's such a good shooter. And that's so far in the distance now.
Yeah, I mean, he's played really only one season. He played 26 games one year. Every year other than that, he's played 74 or more games. So it hasn't been an issue. Hopefully it will not be an issue for the rest of his career. But, Walton kind of, he battled injuries, but then, had just like a 2-year season amazing peak, nowhere near statistically what Steph is doing. But he had that same sort of like, people kind of remember him in that magical way. He has that peak, kind of that mystique that, different level than what Steph is doing because, obviously a lot more fame in this era. But the kind of the way that he got people excited about how he played, I feel like there's some similarities there.
Absolutely.
So next is Russell Westbrook. So talk a little bit about how Westbrook compares to Curry, because it's actually. Well, honestly, closer than you think, but maybe Westbrook statistically has a better case than Curry does.
And I don't have it in front of me, but I think Westbrook's got one more year or one extra year on Curry, right? Or is it? I forgot who's got one. Someone's got 1 year higher.
It is. Westbrook has one more season.
Okay. So that's it. Okay. I just want to make sure I was correct there. But so I did a little bit of a comparison of like guards of this sort of era. So I basically did from Russell Westbrook's rookie year to his current year, and that of course will include Steph Curry, minus 1 year of there and there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, Steph Curry, he's third in points per 36. Russell Westbrook's second in points per 36. Russell Westbrook's 13 in assists per 36, which I was kind of shocked that he was that high. Steph Curry's 21st, but of course knowing sort of the Steph Curry thing, but still it's very interesting. Steph Curry's 35th in rebounds per 36. Russell Westbrook is 5th in rebounds per 36. So you look at Russell right there. I mean, you look at a guy who's 2nd in points, 13th in assists, and 5th in rebounds. I mean, that perfectly describes, the sort of the Russell Westbrook experience there. Here's where we get a little bit of a gap. Steph Curry is 1st in effective field goal percentage. It'll be a shock to you, but Russell Westbrook is not in the top 5 or the top 50 or the top 100. He's actually 131st in effective field goal percentage, but that's Russell Westbrook. So that's, it is what it is. But then you look at some other stuff. Steph Curry is 3rd in win shares per 48. Russell Westbrook is I lost my 8th in win shares per 48. Russell Westbrook's 5th in win shares. Steph Curry's 3rd in win shares, and Russell Westbrook's 3rd in value over replacement player. And Steph Curry's, because I also kind of looked at him in only his career, he's 3rd in value over replacement player. But it's like a very minor difference between those two. And it, of course, I was doing a lot of this as the season was going on, so they were sort of they were close enough where it was switching at different times. So they're very close in value over replacement player, very close, in win shares and even win shares per 48. So I just thought it was interesting of that. We look at a guy, Steph Curry is 23rd, and Russell Westbrook, who, on pure like sort of counting stats of the points, rebounds, and assists is right there. Of course, Steph has a little bit more in terms of efficiency, which helps him out a lot in, the win shares and, value replacement player and all that sort of stuff. But it's an interesting case for a guy that's, 49th on this list. And I don't think anybody really bats an eye at the fact that he's 49th, but he's got a decent case. And that's why I was saying, I'd be cool if a Steph Curry was like a 45th or whatever, and Russell Westbrook was 49. Like, that seems a little bit more. But to have this large of a gap between the two, when really, statistically, there's not that big of a gap there. But, it's sort of you're extrapolating a lot of what Steph's going to do this year. But, Russell Westbrook still got a lot of career left.
Yeah,
you can be honest that he's just kind of finding himself in a lot of ways. I mean, he's having one of his best years. Last year was, of course, because he was just literally given the ball every single time and said, okay, we have nothing else. Do whatever you'd want or whatever. But we're starting to see a sort of a maturing Russell Westbrook, a guy that you could extrapolate as well and say, over the next 5 years, if that guy stays healthy and doesn't, kill himself by just diving and dunking with reckless abandon or whatever, he's a guy that could become a real, I mean, especially so if him and Durant break up at any point, if Durant goes somewhere or Westbrook goes anywhere, this is a guy who just can explode statistically and explode, in many different ways. So I just found it kind of interesting that he was 49th and Curry was 23rd, because it's the gap, I think, is a lot closer than that.
Yeah, and Westbrook is a few months younger as well. So
exactly,
so they're the same age. Have this, that breakup thing as well. Yeah, they both have 3 seasons top 10 win shares for 48 and 4 seasons top 10 box score plus minus. So kind of right there all times. Yeah, and all time Westbrook is 10th all time in assist percentage, which is just shocking considering he's his reputation as a ball hog. That seems pretty silly. 7th in usage rate. Okay, that might be more in line with that.
That sounds
but you get what I'm saying. And yeah, 77th in win shares for 48. Not very good, but not quite as impressive. And 21st in box score plus minus. So but yeah, as far as like kind of those career accomplishments, he's right there. 4-time on the All NBA second team. Probably a good chance he'll be in the first team this year. I would guess. And then, as far as the other ones go, like I don't have necessarily strong feelings about any of them being on this list. Well, I guess there's one actually that looking at his production versus his reputation, I think is pretty interesting. James Harden, who I think is very comparable to Westbrook and
people just had a heart attack.
Curry. But Harden has 4 seasons top 10 win shares for 48, so more than Westbrook and Curry. 5 seasons box score plus minus in the top 10, also more than Westbrook or Curry. Very similar ranking in MVP award shares, 41st all time versus 33rd all time for Curry. So, and you kind of compare them by era, they're pretty similar as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have, I mentioned the aforementioned numbers about Curry and Westbrook. Harden, who, of course, relatively similar area here, 5th in points per 36, 37th in rebounds per 36, 77th in assists per 36. He really gets a lot of in the value stats, believe it or not. 2nd in win shares, 2nd in win shares per 48, and then 4th in value over replacement players. So you look again, if counting stats are sort of your deal, I mean, he's right there with those. But then the other ones, I mean, the value stats, the win shares, and the value over replacement player, I mean, he's right there with those guys. I mean, they are in that sort of top 5 of this era of guards. Right there. So it's pretty startling that he was, 98. And again, you could, if you strip away everything, and if I just gave you those sort of ranks and said, hey, tell me who these 3 guys are, it'd be shocking to you if I think if it was, James Harden and Steph Curry are kind of neck and neck in those things. And that's that even surprised me a little bit.
Yeah. And he is 18th all time in win shares for 48, 17th all time in box score plus minus. So that puts him ahead of Curry in one and right behind him in the other. So, I think people obviously think Harden is great. He was runner-up for MVP last year. I think the defense and the malaise of his team this year have knocked him down a peg. But I would say if you're comparing the 3 of them, I think they are fairly similar. And Harden is 98th. So I find that interesting. And hey, there may be, again, there's a lot of things that you're measuring here. Stats are clearly not everything. But I kind of, it is sort of a little bit puzzling. It's like, oh, why is Harden so much lower than the rest of these guys?
Yeah, what's surprising as well, and I think that's why I was shocked by it too, is that you have to really look and doing this, I did a little bit of research on Harden's career, and of course we all know that he started in OKC and that sort of stuff. But you really look at it, I mean, like his output was great. I mean, his per minute output was fantastic in Oklahoma City, but he just wasn't getting the minutes or the ball that much, and it's kind of shocking and surprising that a lot of this stuff of these gaudy numbers have come in the last few years as he's moved and transitioned to Houston. So it's kind of shocking too that we look at this guy, a guy like a Curry who, maybe had 1 year where he kind of had to learn the ropes, and Westbrook, maybe one as well. You could argue that James Harden, it took, 2-3 years for him to really find his footing, and then exploded, of course, when he went to Houston. But yeah, I mean, it's shocking how well he's done, despite the fact that he was sort of the third fiddle on that team for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other guys on this list, Blake Griffin, 75th, Chris Bosh, 86th, Marc Gasol, 95th, and Kevin Love, 99. Blake's actually resume was stronger than I kind of realized. He's another guy whose reputation has kind of taken a hit lately because of off-court antics. But he does have 4 All-NBA team appearances, including 3 on the second team, 1 on the third team. He has 2 seasons in the top 10 in win shares for 48, 1 time in box score plus minus. Hasn't really played long enough to really achieve any all-time ranks. He's definitely a fun guy to watch, but he's actually probably accumulated more, especially in those All-NBA teams, than I kind of had realized he had.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked as well. He was another one that, you just don't think, and that could be a reputation thing as well. It could be just sort of how we perceive these guys, but and he's a guy that I even as the season's going on, and even when I look at his stats, I'm always kind of shocked. Oh my, Blake Griffin's actually having like a very good year. We just don't appreciate the guy. I don't know. It's very odd. It's very strange, but
I mean, people kind of realize he's good, but kind of like how
not on that good level. Like he's a good little asset to a team that he's like, he's a very good player, but he'd be great if he had, it's just I don't know. It's interesting. I just don't know if we fully appreciate quite how good he really is.
Yeah, it's definitely like he's accomplished more than I think people would realize.
Oh, absolutely.
And a guy who has less of these achievements than I would have thought. He was kind of an original guy we were looking at for our top 50, but just didn't really have his rankings just kind of statistically, his profile was just not strong enough for us to consider it, despite, we both, I think, respect him as a player and think of him as close to that level as Chris Bosh. Only one All-NBA team for his career is a second team.
I'm so surprised that in those, I mean, especially those lean Toronto years when it was just him. Like it was, it was like, here's the ball, Chris Bosh. Do you have it every, you know what I mean? Like I'm shocked and have a lot of your numbers or I feel like living in that area, living and watching at that time, I felt like he was a guy that was like an all-star, like a top tier sort of player, just because he put up such gaudy numbers, but I guess not.
Yeah, and those teams, they had some up and down years, but they were pretty good. And he's like a 12-time All-Star, so he's gotten the things that way. But he and actually statistically. No top 10 seasons in win shares for 48, none also in box score plus minus. He does have 2 top 10 seasons in PER if you want to look at that. But, the all-time ranks are he's 71st in win shares for 48, which is pretty good. Box score plus minus doesn't really like him, despite his reputation for being a great defender, 169th. So definitely a guy who I think the stats don't necessarily show his value, particularly when he played Miami. I think I think he's greater than that shows, but ranked surprisingly low in a lot of these categories.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about we talked about James Harden earlier. I mean, Chris Bosh is 86th on this list. James Harden's 98th, and James Harden just absolutely blows him away. Statistically.
And I'm not saying that I would necessarily pick James Harden over Chris Bosh, but I just
no.
But the resume it definitely is more impressive for Harden.
Right. And a lot of that, as you mentioned, the Miami years as well sort of maybe hurt Bosh a little bit in terms of he very quickly sort of put himself, for the betterment of the team, put himself in a very, strict role, which didn't really help him continue the gaudy numbers that he had for so many years. He sort of said, okay, you know what? Hey, I'll just kind of sit in the corner. I'll do this. I'll play great defense and do this sort of stuff. And he was, instrumental to the defensive of that Miami team, and just a really good defender, maybe an underrated defender. So some of these stats don't really show that out as well of the spacing stuff that he was able to do and cutting off lanes and doing that sort of stuff he was able to do in Miami. But still, when you sort of look at these sort of resumes the way we're doing it, yeah, he doesn't jump off at the page for you at all.
Yeah. I'm not sure for Marc Gasol or Kevin Love, if there's anything specific. I view them as sort of borderline guys for this list. I mean, Gasol had one Defensive Player of the Year award, twice on the All-NBA team, one All-NBA first team, only one season in the top 10 in Winchester 48, one season in the top 10 in box score plus minus. All-time ranks are good, but nothing spectacular. 84th in Winchester 48, 38th in box score plus minus, so that's stronger. But a very good player, but probably developed a little bit too late into a really valuable player, and then is kind of gotten to the point where he's gotten older and is still good, but not quite as good.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Love, production is a little bit stronger than I expected. He had 3 seasons in the top 10 in Winchester 48, 2 in box score plus minus. Has sort of suffered in his production since he moved on to Cleveland. I think it'll kind of be like a wait and see thing for depending on how much they accomplish and how productive he can kind of be in that framework. Because he's not. Unlike Bosch, he's not really adding a lot of value in the intangibles for the most part. I mean, I guess maybe somewhat in, offensive spacing and things like that, but he's probably taking a lot away in defense. So it would be hard to rate him, kind of based on that. Give him a pass kind of based on that.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah, but he jumped off the page a little bit statistically, but I get sort of 99th. I think that's probably fine with him. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I could probably make an argument for a few guys to sort of take him off and put on, but yeah, it's hard to get really upset about the 99th guy in the top 100 list.
Exactly. So a couple of things that we wanted to add before we take off are so there is a new at Nylon Calculus. A new metric called HBox has been about Justin Willard has been created that we were kind of looking at, and the idea is that it is basically a way of looking at a new way of looking at historical players, sort of a new metric created for that, and that's obviously is exciting for us because we are, evaluating old players, and sometimes the regular box score numbers or even the advanced stats have a hard time capturing everything. So this is sort of an attempt at a one number metric to look at a lot of different things. So what about it seemed interesting to you, and looking at some of the searches, what do you think is most interesting?
One of the things that I really liked about it, and again, go to nyloncalculus.com to get a little bit more information about it. Like we'll have a link to it. We're big dummies, so we probably can't explain it as well as he explains it, because we're still trying to figure it out as well. I'm not going to act like I'm an expert or I know about it. I mean, of course, and they're very easy to reach as well. So I'm sure if you have a question about, hey, I don't quite understand this about the stat, go there and ask them. I'm sure they'll be more than willing to help. But yeah, like it said, it's another box score stat, but it takes a few other things into account. Different stuff like per possession stuff, a little bit more that we now have a little bit more information and can kind of dig into the box score stats a little bit more and look at some other stuff. So it helps in that way. It's kind of cool in that respect. But what I really loved about it was that it broke down guys by season as well. Initially, I kind of got mad about that. I was like, oh man, I wanted to see like who's like the all-time ranks or whatever. And then I sort of said, it's kind of cool to look at like, hey, what, per HBox, what is the best Michael Jordan season? What's the best LeBron James? That was kind of fun as well. And we sort of, in playing around with it, looked at guys that had, above 6 in HBox, and the stat, it's lower sort of numbers as well. So 6 is like tremendous. 6 is like all time, anything above that is like, you're tremendously great. You're awesome. Yeah. You're all time good or whatever. So we wanted to sort of look at,
just sorry to interrupt, but the highest possible, or the highest ever is 9.47.
Right. So that gives you a little area of, or an idea that's, 6 to the 9 is
and there are, close to 40 seasons that go above 6. Is that right? right? Something.
Yeah, somewhere around that range, I think I think that's around the number that I got. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to see sort of the breakdown of these guys who had over 6, and it can kind of give you an idea of maybe what the stat favors, what sort of things it favors, because that's always something I enjoy about basketball metrics. You're not supposed to say ever, PR, that's the only stat I'm ever going to use forever. It's like, no, don't do that. You don't ever. That's just don't stop doing that. Stop being that guy. But instead, you sort of look at the different ones, look at different numbers, and then you can sort of, I think, contextualize of, okay, this stat maybe favors this. Like we talked about the win shares per 48 or whatever, different things like that. That maybe the guys with a little bit of a higher efficiency, they'll do a little bit better in that. Whereas the guys with gaudy, counting stats don't do as well in win shares or value of a replacement player. This stat they do better in that, or and PR has its weird stuff. They all have their sort of things that they favor a little bit because it's going to happen with metrics where you're trying to put everything into one. So this is kind of interesting to see the breakdown of guys that had above 6 to sort of see what the stat favors, and I guess we'll sort of work through it as we talk about it. But so here are all the guys that had seasons above. I'm just going to list how many seasons they had above 6. I'm not going to list.
We should also mention that this dates back to 1978.
Exactly. Yeah. So like many of these ones, unfortunately, yeah, it very much is like I sorry, can't help you in the 1960s because the stats are terrible. Any stat keeping or record keeping was horrendous. So there's only so much you can do with that.
They didn't keep track of they didn't have steals, blocks, and they didn't have stats. I mean, none of them were bad at keeping the stats. They just didn't have what they have to later on. So,
but yeah, some kind of guys here with above 6 HBox seasons. Bill Walton had 1. Charles Barkley had 1. Chris Paul 1. David Robinson 5, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty surprising. 91, 92, 94, 95, 96. So we've talked about it a lot. We're like the pro David Robinson early 90s podcast here. We're like, come on, respect this man.
Yep.
Like, he was really good. But so it's kind of cool to see him have 5 there. Dwayne Wade with 1. Grant Hill with 1. Hakeem Olajuwon 1. James Harden 1 last year. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 2. Karl Malone 2. Kevin Durant 2. Kevin Garnett 3. Kevin Love 1. 2014 was for Kevin Love. Larry Bird, I was shocked, only 2. 87, 88.
Yeah, but interesting that's late in his career too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was
the same with
LeBron James. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say same with Malone, where it's 97, 98. I mean, he's like 15, 16 years in his career at the
Malone was a killer in his early years.
I mean, I know he was great in his older years, but it surprises me that he was, at least according to this, better in those years than he was, like in 1990, 1991.
Absolutely. LeBron James has 7 of these, which is just insane. 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. So LeBron, good. Magic Johnson, 4. 87, 89, 90, and 91.
Yeah, again, late in his career, too.
Yeah, were you surprised by that? I thought that was kind of interesting.
It does.
None of the mid-'80s really got it, except for 87.
If there's something about how a player ages that, if this picks up at all, like the fact that you just kind of get to be a smarter player as you're older, and that you're maybe you're not as productive in some ways, but you're able to. I'm not sure exactly how much it's able to kind of keep to take into account something like that, but that would be what I would think as far as the reason why they would be able to achieve this despite being past their athletic peak.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Jordan had 5. So, LeBron has more than him, so get all mad. 88, 89, 90, 91, 92. Now, what's interesting is the inverse with Michael Jordan, where we talked about all of these other guys and their later careers. That was when they really, like a Karl Malone, of course. And Michael Jordan, no, it's the early sort of his physical prime was when he really excelled in this stat. So that was fun.
Yeah, I wonder, thinking about it for Magic and Bird, I wonder if, because Magic had to kind of take a larger role from 87 through 91, with Kareem retiring and, kind of it necessitating it becoming his team. Plus, he wasn't that old. He had, of course, had to retire young. He was 31, 32. I mean, so he wasn't quite ancient. Bird, to maybe to a similar extent, because even though he had McHale and Parrish, they definitely were a less deep team. So maybe the fact that they kind of had to take like a bigger role during these times might have played a part in this. That's just kind of speculation, but it does make some sense.
Certainly. Russell Westbrook has 2, 2005 and 2016. So of course this year he's in there. as well. That could be subject to change. But
yeah.
Shaquille O'Neal, 2000 and 2001. I thought that was kind of interesting that none of the early Shaq years were there. But he really became. I mean, I would say that his real like kind of his prime was those years. I'm fine with saying that. I mean, he was a more dominant physical force probably in like the mid 90s. But this is like, especially in that era. I mean, there was just no answer for Shaq in 2000.
And he had a couple of he had a couple of mildly down years from like 97, 99 before he came back with a vengeance. So that may that's kind of part of it too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Steph Curry has 2, 2015, 2016. I imagine he will probably stay in there. And then last but not least, I was kind of shocked by this. Tim Duncan only won 2003. I mean, obviously his best year, but I was kind of surprised. But that's it. Then again, though, it is Tim Duncan, and he's sort of more appreciated by watching him than sort of looking at his numbers, even though he does have pretty gaudy numbers sometimes.
Yeah,
but...
and he's sort of, and again, in a lot of his career, he's sort of taken the intentional step back.
Exactly. Right.
So that could definitely be a part of it. Yeah, I we'll play around with it more and learn more about it and see if there's anything else that we can kind of conclude there. But it's nice to it's nice to have a tool that that theoretically could be interesting to us as basketball historians. And so the one last thing is Kevin Pelton of ESPN, who was of course part of the NBA rank and wrote a bit about it. Coming up with the a metric of championships added, and basically. The idea is that it incorporates both regular season and postseason success, but it sort of gives a little bit of extra value to postseason success. Also incorporates all-star appearances, all-NBA appearances, and MVP voting based on how well they translate to winning championships. So it's sort of, and with win shares, it's sort of takes care a little bit of the problem of rewarding longevity over quality of play, because it sort of relates the win shares to each season to a typical team's chances of winning a championship. So he used the example of, for instance, a season with a 15 win shares, which was using the example of Kobe Bryant's 2006 season, is nearly 3 times as valuable as one with 10 win shares, even though it's only 5 more win shares. It's just that much better to have a 15 win share season than it is to have a 10 win share season, because 15 win share seasons are obviously very rare. So so the conclusions are not exactly that surprising. It's Jordan, Wilt Chamberlain, LeBron James, Kareem, Russell, Duncan, Shaq, Magic, Bird, and then Karl Malone. And I don't think we have to explain too much with Jordan. Wilt, I guess, is a little bit surprising because he, of course, didn't actually have that much. I mean, he won 2 championships, is not successful, but Russell is so much more successful, obviously 11 championships in 13 years. But the idea of that Wilt's just, his play theoretically should have added that much. And,
right.
He was first in regular season, third in the playoffs, so his production in the playoffs fell off a little bit comparatively. So that kind of knocked him down a little bit. So as far as other than I would think maybe I would have just thought of Russell as being a little bit higher, but again, Russell's value, I think, is difficult to measure because he didn't score a lot.
Absolutely.
But he and defense, we know so little about defense now that we have all the tools that we have. Knowing about it in Bill Russell's day is extremely difficult as well, especially since turnovers, block shots, and steals weren't tracked then. So
exactly. I mean, that almost would be the game changer, especially if you sort of added those stats in there, I think, in a sense. But because a lot of stuff that Russell excelled at so much, and again, I'm not taking, I think Wilt Chamberlain is probably fine being there. But if you wanted to say that, yeah, hey, if we track some of those, and maybe if Bill Russell was a little bit more, apt to score a little bit more as opposed to just sort of, get the awesome block, throw the ball down. I mean, it obviously worked. You could say to an extent for the old Boston Celtics of that era. But yeah, so I see why, I understand why he's 5th on this list, and I understand why. But yeah, if you were purely just going to say, hey, who who helped their team win more championships, you're going to probably say Bill Russell or whatever. But, statistically, you get Wilt Chamberlain there. But I have no issue really with any of the guys on this list. I think it's a really good, really good list. And I think the approach to it is admirable as well, and I really do think it's pretty
I like
good.
Kevin Pelton a lot, and I appreciate that he writes some about history, talks about history when he's on podcasts and stuff, and has a good perspective. So he's definitely a guy to follow. Yeah, he ranked 40. A couple surprises to me. Or not huge surprises, but Dirk was 15th on this list, so that kind of, as opposed to Garnett at 18. So he was that may have helped him a little bit in the 17th ranking that we talked about before. Hakeem was 19th, so sort of lower than you might expect, just given his famous playoff appearances. Artis Gilmore was 29th on this list, and you think I think his reputation is a little bit more of like a guy who didn't necessarily do that much in playoffs and just kind of accumulated a lot of longevity and a lot of regular season stuff, but didn't really have playoff success. But this has him pretty high, so I found that interesting. Other than that, it's not there aren't a whole lot of huge shocks on the list. Chauncey Billups is 38th. He's a guy who I've touted before as being maybe a little more valuable than stats show. So
I one thing that I thought was interesting, sorry not to cut you off here, but there were a few guys that we talked about in the earlier list that we were like, oh man, I can't believe how low they were ranked, or how they were ranked in general. You look at championships added, Bob Pettit 21st, Dolph Schayes 23rd, and then a guy like Paul Arizin 35th for him. So those are guys who ranked very well in this. And we've
George
sort of said, hey,
too. So
I completely missed George Mikan as well. Yeah, that's perfect examples of guys that we think that maybe just got kind of a raw deal in NBA rank. But this sort of stat shows the value that those guys had and how good they were, especially a Pettit, a Mikan, and to a lesser extent Schayes, and then to a lesser extent Arizin.
Yeah. And honestly, like the approach that the way that he describes it, obviously we don't have a statistical model like he does, but we do have kind of a, I would say
our brains are a statistical model.
I would say this is sort of how I would kind of look at this sort of the thing that I would look at. Okay, look at these numbers, look at these honors, see what it says, and then do the research deeper and to try to kind of figure it out. But these are sort of the way that I would largely weigh these. I think the one thing that I hadn't really thought about is how much is the exponential value of a 15 win share season versus a 10 win share season. And that might be interesting to kind of look into a little bit more and look at some of the more elite seasons and how to, how much better to weigh them because of just how much better they are than, a really, really great season, and I guess you could kind of make that case with Stephen Curry this year. So, but other than that, I think, these just are mostly common sense things that, that kind of makes sense. I do feel like, sometimes I think longevity gets a little bit of a raw deal, over the the high points of a career, but I do think that it's a nice blend of those approaches. Anything else, Rich?
I think that's it for me. Yes. So, I mean, it was. I thought by and large, I think it was a cool little experiment, and at least it got people interested a little bit more in sort of NBA history. It's not only us and a few other guys that are really interested in it. And that's not to say, I mean, there are plenty of people that are interested in it, but to see it on such of a bigger scale and to have people arguing about there's spirited Bob Pettit arguments in my Twitter feed, and that doesn't happen very often. So I thought nice. That was cool to see.
Hopefully, it got some basketball reference, some traffic, and got some interest going on in there. It was fun. So I figured it was a big enough thing that we should weigh in on it. Again, we're weighing in a little bit late, but hopefully people enjoy our take on it and enjoy the things that we do to talk about basketball history. So
absolutely.
So anyone can check us out at hardwoodparoxysm.com. We are on Twitter at Over and Back NBA, also on Facebook at Over and Back NBA. And we would be so grateful if you would subscribe to us on iTunes, or we are now on Stitcher as well. So if you subscribe to us, give us a good old review and a rating on either of those platforms. That would be greatly appreciated. I think that's it. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back again soon.